Hello, and welcome to Lords of Limited, live from MagicCon Chicago!
Woo!
My name is Ben Morney, and joining me right here is Mr. Ethan Pro Tour competitor Sachs. Ethan, how's the journey been from pleb to pro?
Pleb to pro, it went half as expected or anticipated. The goal was 2-1 limited, 2-3 constructed, make it to day 2. We got the first half of that right. The rest of it, not so much. We'll talk about that a little later on. I'm assuming, hopefully, that in the audience we have some folks who are new to the show, so I feel like we need to just say a little bit about what we do. So we're a limited strategy podcast. One of the reasons we've conned our way to being on this stage is that I played in my first Pro Tour this weekend. Thank you. I didn't do great, hence I got to be at the news desk yesterday during the coverage portion at the start of the broadcast. But also, we have some credence, we have some cred. 2 of the top 8 competitors, Alex Friedrichsen and Simon Nielsen, came up to me this weekend, and they were ecstatic about the show. They were elated. They were overflowing with their gratitude about the show. Alex literally said to me today, he said, I 6-0'd limited this weekend because of your podcast. So if I can't make it, that's about as good as you can take it. So
wait, how come you didn't 3-0 then?
We'll get to that later, Benjamin. What about you, buddy? You got to do some high-stakes competitive draft this weekend, or not draft, but sealed, right?
Yeah, did some sealed. Played in the PTQ to try to join Ethan here on the Pro Tour, but pool was good, above average. Had Crashing Footfalls as my best rare. Some other rares: Anzrag, the Quake Mole, Kellen, Inquisitive Prodigy. My pool was kind of hard to build. I had a choice between streamlined red-white aggro and probably not playing Crashing Footfalls, which would have been tough to leave on the side. But I did have a good streamlined red-white deck. That or kind of 4-color soup if I played base green-white. I was 100% to play white and ended up going for the 4-color soup because I really wanted to take advantage of Crashing Footfalls, but unfortunately it was pretty shy on turn 1. I went 3-2 drop in the PTQ, but it was awesome. I played against great opponents, had a blast playing every round, tight matches. This format has been absolutely incredible.
I agree. I feel like I'm biased because I've never spent more focus on trying to win at a limited format than this. But it's great. There's some. We'll get into it as we talk about the prep for the Pro Tour. If you're a longtime listener for Lord of the Rings, in preparation for that, or before that Pro Tour, we did an episode where we were like, here's what we would do
if we were on the Pro Tour.
If we were on the Pro Tour, here's how we would approach pick orders, maybe metagaming. If you're sitting down with players who know what's up, and we actually got to kind of do that for real here, really hash out a top 10 common, a top 10 uncommon list, that sort of thing. I tested with Team Sanctum of All, and we had a proper, shout out, thank you. Woo. Sanctum is awesome. I have nothing but great things to say about those folks. I feel incredibly lucky that I got to work with them. But we did a proper limited testing meeting online, lining up all the commons and uncommons and rares and where they go, and just far too long dickering and dealing about where things go, but really good conversation. So we're going to sort of truncate that, and I think more focus on what you and I thought about things and our conversations about it. So I think we just get into those lists, yeah?
Well, yeah, just absolutely wild, too. You talked about testing with your team, doing those lobby drafts Thursday morning, just for me, you'd been around all those people online, the people we were with, and then Team Ultimate Guard was next to us, borrowing lands from us, and it was just super chill, just wild to be here and be a part of that.
Yeah, the whole weekend has been truly incredible. But let's get into the hashtag content.
Absolutely.
So we'll start with top commons. And I think the big story, you can see the list here on our slide. They're ordered from top left corner is number 1 across and down to top right, or lower right being number 10. This is sort of the loose pick order, and the big conversation you and I keep having, and I think are still not agreed or decided on, is Dogwalker versus Novice Inspector pick 1. I think we will agree to disagree at this point. I am firmly in the Dogwalker camp. I made the slides. That's why Dogwalker is in the number 1 slot. Sorry, buddy.
We need to do show of applause.
No. We're not. No, I don't do Twitter polls, and I don't do crowd polls. But the conversation here, as you can see, of Dogwalker and then white card, Novice Inspector 2, Makeshift Binding 3, and Inside Source 4 ahead of Shock. I think in a vacuum, the big conversation here beyond Dogwalker versus Inspector is why is Shock below Binding and Source? So let's start with the Dogwalker versus Inspector. I will defend Dogwalker as, I think, worse than Novice Inspector, but bumped up for flexibility. We'll see that in a hybrid card when we get to the uncommons that I think is perhaps a little underrated, even in invested limited players thinking about it being so flexible. I can't state enough how great Dogwalker is. It's going to go in 40% of your decks. I think other than a handful, maybe the other one that's on this list being Granite Witness, that like the hybrid cards you really do want in their respective color pair decks, I think Dogwalker, just playing it in any red deck, any white deck.
Yeah, I would say Dogwalker gets enough of a hit if you're not exactly red-white. I think that's why I like Novice Inspector, because basically to me, Dogwalker is a white card, and then I think Novice Inspector is more powerful. That's where the disagreement comes in. Novice Inspector turn 1 just feels so backbreaking. Your board presence replaces itself with a clue.
Got
and
good
I don't,
types.
yeah, good types, and I don't think you give up that much in the course of the draft in flexibility by taking Novice Walker over Dogwalker, because if I'm taking Dogwalker, I want to surround it by Inside Source. I don't think if you don't, or not Inside Source,
On the job.
that and On the Job,
Yeah.
if you don't have those two cards next to Dogwalker, I think it also is worse, significantly worse.
Yeah, I buy that, and maybe it's a little bit of, this was one of my notes to myself going into drafting at the PT was not, like someone's got to be white at the table. Like the conversation around white, it's very powerful, it's whatever, maybe is it overdrafted? And we've seen in pod drafts, we've done a number of them leading up to this, like either testing with Sanctum, doing them in the lobby leading up to the PT this week.
On Magic Online,
On
they
Magic
had the
Online, yeah,
single
doing the
limb
single
Phantom.
limb. Like sometimes you get pods where there are 4 white drafters. But I think the texture of play boosters that you're not guaranteed a common of every color in the packs now means that you can actually end up with tables where just like not a lot of white cards are opened, and then maybe it's 1 or 2 people are actually in white.
Right, we definitely saw that on one of our Thursday drafts. for
Yeah,
sure.
and so and then everybody's in green soup decks or whatever, but like you get in a spot where you have to do a little like will they, won't they about drafting white, and like trying not to be gun shy was one of my big notes, because I can often do that, like level myself, like, well, that's the overdrafted thing, so I'll just go ahead and avoid that completely. It's like, no, but somebody does, people do have to draft white at the table, why not you?
Right, and it's the best thing, so if it is you, good for you.
And so that's why Shock, where I think I would put Shock number 3 on this list, is number 5, because I do want to get into white. And not that I don't want to get into red, but I'm less interested in it, because as you can see, we have 5 white cards really represented in this top 10 list, then 3 green, and only 1 red, or 2 if you count Dogwalker, that like, Shock just, it's great, but it puts you, I think, in a narrower position.
Right, that's what we were talking about with your testing team versus what we thought. It
Yeah.
seems like your testing team really wanted to be red and white, or viewed the format as a primarily white, secondarily red format, and I think we're viewing it as primarily white, secondarily green.
Green, yeah, because I missed the first our commons meeting. I was doing like paper testing to get some reps with my deck and paper first. So I missed our commons meeting, so I came into it with some questions, having watched the video of like, I feel like it's a Selesnya format, and they seem just a lot higher on red. And not that we're low on red, but I think, yeah, I definitely would view it as my ideal is to, like what we talked about a couple weeks ago of like, I want to be a white deck, a green deck, or maybe like one of the streamlined 2-color decks, but really what comes to mind when I think of that is blue-red.
Yeah, but so much of how you end up there is picking these commons early in the drafts. Like, you just have to make some choices about what you want to do early on.
Yeah. So 4 white cards, Shock, Projector Inspector, which was a mainstay of my day 2 draft, or day 1 draft, as we'll talk about towards the end of the episode. But Projector Inspector is just incredible. Like, it's got good types. The loot is so good. I think you just play it in any deck, right? It slots into, okay, if you want to fuel your yard with collect evidence stuff, you can do that on the loots. And like, green has detectives too, right? Locks on Eavesdropper is on this list. That's a detective. So like, it's not like you're going to be shy. Is V2 Ghazi Inspector too? That's also that's also a detective. Like, you can just get that in blue-green easy to trigger it a bunch of times. And I think it's just going to shine in any blue deck, but blue-white certainly is where it's at its best.
Well, but also 18 lands. Like, it just lets you feel great about playing 18 lands and not flooding, finding land drops if you need to. And so much of the format revolves around really powerful cards, too. I mean, there's tons of premium rares. and that's going to help you churn through your deck and find those things if you're surrounding it with other detectives. It just does tons of work. And I think if you're white, you want to be red-white primarily, and then blue-white secondarily, and Projector Inspector is right at home there.
Yeah, exactly. And then we get into green, and I do think green has there's sort of a couple different things. I think ideally green is a base for a multicolor good stuff deck. Like my green decks have often been heavy green, like 10, 11 green sources, and then 5-ish of blue or black generally, and then splashing one of the other ones. So usually Sultai, but like very heavy green, and that's where Nervous Gardener, I think, gets the top spot, even though I think like Loxodon Eavesdropper as whatever, Novice Inspector's big bad older brother, and V2 Ghazi Inspector is just a great roadblock / good reach early blocker against the flyers in the format, and the life gain later on, and the collect evidence synergy. Like all of that, you could shuffle them up, but I think if I have to start with a green card, Nervous Gardener is the one.
Well, it just feels better because it's a better spot on the curve, too. Like, if you're starting with it, that's why. It's so tough to, like...
But, like, are you ever playing it on 2? Is that what you're saying? Like,
No. On 3. I mean, 3 versus 4. For the
Oh,
Loxodon,
sure.
like,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
starting your draft off with a 3-drop versus a 4-drop feels so much better because the 4-drop slot, there's just banger after banger in this format.
Yeah, that's very true. And then pulling up the rear here is Granite Witness in the number 10 spot. Another shout out to White, Hybrid. This being 2 mana to Undisguise is really huge here, much like Dogwalker. It having an effect when it flips up is also really good. And that's our top 10. And notably, I mean, we can get to the next slide of the notable excludes. There are no black cards on that list. And not that we don't like black in the format. It is, I think, clearly the worst color, but I'm not starting off a draft with black commons.
Yeah, you're just not ever in that spot hardly at all because white is so deep and there's so many good rares and uncommons.
Right. So like it's just so hard to construct a pack where that's right. I think I would take Escape Tunnel, the Evolving Wilds variant. I think I would take that over a black common early, like
for sure,
for the flexibility. So just some notable excludes to sort of to put at ease anyone who was like, what about this card? So Out Cold's on here, Red Herring, Person of Interest, Bite Down on Crime, Extract a Confession, and Gadget Technician are sort of on the outside looking in of that top list.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's get on to the uncommons. Cannot wait to talk about this. So I came into the testing meeting, the day 2, with Neighborhood Guardian as sort of the anchor for the top uncommon. And I was like, that seems a little aggressive. That's fine. I'm sure there's something better. And then as we were going through all of them, I was like, oh, I don't think there is.
No, it's broken.
I think it's just the best one. And again, it just does exactly what White wants to do on turn 2 and demands an answer. It's like so huge.
And if your opponent doesn't answer it, you just win in short order. If you've got Dog Walkers, Inside Sources,
Source.
the curve of Neighborhood Guardian into Inside Source, which is super doable, is very hard to come back from.
And then, so the card I wanted to talk about when we were saying like shouting out hybrid cards and the like is the next one on this list, which is Push Pull, which is like really every time I've seen it like gone up and up. I remember telling you like early on being like, man, I've been casting Pull a lot more than I thought I was going to be. So this is the hybrid. It's one hybrid Orzhov, destroy a tapped creature at sorcery speed, and then the other one, Pull, is 4 black-red hybrid, and you can grab 2 creatures out of one person's graveyard. They gain haste, and then you sacrifice them at the beginning of the end step. Pull just ends tons of games. And the flexibility here of you can put it in a white deck, you can put it in a black deck. If you're black, you can cast both halves. If you're white-red, you can cast both halves. And like, it doesn't trade great with disguised creatures, right? You do have to pay 4 to kill a disguised creature, but you can do it, right? We're not in murder territory where it's 5 mana to do it. Everything about this card, like, it's that sort of the thing we keep coming back to about like every piece of the buffalo. Like, this card just does it all in terms of early in the draft. The flexibility it gives you can't be understated.
That's where you've talked me up on it. I was lukewarm on push-pull, and over the last 3 or 4 days, I've come way up on it because I think one of the most important things in the format, and we've talked a lot about this, is this format really wants you to get deep into one color in Pack 1 for several reasons. One, the colors are kind of self-contained in what they want to do, certainly between white and green, and you get into some streamlined 2-color decks, but what you give yourself the opportunity to if you get deep in one color is either find that open 2-color pair, like delay that decision, see which gold cards are coming late, because it's very much a synergy-driven format, or if you're almost monocolor going into Pack 2, give yourself chance to open great rares or get past great rares, which I think we'll see down the road in your PT draft.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that was something I really took to heart. I think I had been certainly because there's a lot of stuff happening with play boosters. One, the wheel is less present, and so you can kind of scrap for playables a little bit, and so that's why getting deep into one color is so valuable and so important. Is like you want to give yourself the opportunity to not have to feel, one, like you're locked in and you can't pivot, and two, like you're scraping around. Like you really have to take such huge hits in power level because you're working on your curve or whatever, because you bobbed and weaved too much early on. That's why I think the getting deep into one color thing is so important, and why the hybrid cards, the good ones, are so high. And the other one here, like paying 2 mana to get collect evidence 6 fodder in your yard is so good, and that's another thing that push pull does really, really well. Moving on, we've got Torch the Witness at number 3. Killer Among Us number 4, Case of the Gateway Express number 5. Anything to shout out about those 3?
I don't think so. It's pretty self-explanatory. Torch the Witness is a great 2-for-1, like trades up on mana value, very efficient.
And you'll notice that, so we have one hybrid card there, but the top 7 on this list, we have Reckless Detective 6 and Perimeter Enforcer 7. All of them are monocolored. And that's another thing, not that is Detective Satchel not great, and this was something that you and I had lower than Sanctum had on their list. That everyone on Team Sanctum was very high on Detective Satchel, and I think rightfully so. I thought for a long time that it was just a blue-red card, but you really can, you can play green-blue and splash that easily, and it'll be very good for you. It's very sick with one of our outside-looking-in cards, Forensic Researchers, we've talked about. Being able to untap that and activate it twice in a turn is huge. But I've been I think we had the lesson learned a few weeks ago when we were reviewing some drafts, and I got a little slap on the wrist from Ben of taking the gold cards early in this format. I think we're sort of back to, it's a little dangerous. It's too high risk, certainly high reward, but I think too high risk.
Well, because there's 2 ways you want your draft to go. Like we were talking, one of our friends is playing in the PTQ drafts right now, and we were doing some prep with him last night. You either want to play a ton of powerful cards across 3 or 4 colors, base green, or you really, really, really want to be streamlined 2-color. And the way to get in the right streamlined 2-color is to delay the decision and be 1 color and read what's open, certainly if you're white.
Yeah, I think so. We've said that. Your draft should either be, the powerful cards to hold on to, and you do, right? You open a doppelgang, and you're which honestly feels more flexible than it should, because you're I can be green X and splash this, I can be blue X and splash this, because it's early enough, there's fixing enough that I can get my hands on. So knowing the cards that are powerful enough to take early, Izoni certainly, to hang on to and warp your draft around, or find the open color or color pair. It's hard to imagine drafts that don't end up in one of those 2 spots if you're valuing the appropriate cards appropriately.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to reflect here with these top common lists and top uncommon lists is which 2 color pairs we want to get into, which are white-green, white-red, that sort of stuff. But, one of the things that stood out to me from the single limb drafts on MTGO, certainly those Thursday drafts in the morning, I drafted black a lot. Anything is really doable in pod draft.
Yeah, that's why this feels like such a good format to get to dive into, is that it doesn't feel like there's anything worth avoiding, and it feels like if as we'll talk about in a little bit, about when you are getting deep into 1 color, what does that mean? Where are you then going to head? What do you want to pair it with? I think that's so much, and that I think can sound slightly forcing to some people, but it's not. It's just about understanding, maximizing your picks or whatever, putting stuff, setting it up to succeed, that sort of thing. Yeah. Rounding out this top uncommons list, we have Satchel at 8, Lightning Helix 9, and Buried in the Garden 10. Some notable excludes are basically all multicolor cards. Private Eye featured at karaoke last night, very importantly. Coerce the Kill, Gleaming Gear Drake, Aftermath Analyst. I think that's in my heart, in my top 10. But I don't think anyone else but you or I values it that highly. So I think having it on that list in that way is pretty irresponsible. Forensic Researcher, the blue tapper, untapper, and what is that? Last Breath? What is that? Long Goodbye, whatever, the black removal spell. And again, just not a lot of black cards on these lists.
Yeah, not a lot of black cards, but you got to be ready to draft black in pot.
Yeah, so
this is certainly not to write that off.
No, for sure not. So let's talk about what I think differences for pod draft, certainly being hey, we got to be open for anything. And what other things we noticed from going from, and I haven't really done a lot of like, and thankfully I haven't done a lot of like best of one arena drafts, so I don't have that. Been doing a lot of best of 3 drafts, a lot of in-pod drafts in preparation for this. So I don't know really what the differences are for this set specifically, but I recognize what they are in a broader sense. And the 2 things that I kept coming back to were 2 drops and removal. Like the colorless 2-mana 2/1 that surveils 1, like just kept going up and up. It's a card that you would, if you haven't done pod drafts, I imagine you can probably get late. Maybe they wheel. It's a card you're like, I can get that later. You can't get them later in pod drafts, and you should take it now and not be embarrassed about it.
Yeah, Sanitation Automaton is very worthy of your pick order.
That's my number 2 card name, Swear Jar Quarter. I need to drop one in the bucket for. The other thing is removal, and we've talked about removal a lot. We'll see when we get to my draft. Like, I did not get a lot of interaction. I also didn't see much. It's not like I passed a bunch of makeshift bindings or whatever. I just didn't see it, and that's partially because everybody knows that you need to interact, right? And so you can't be choosy about it if you have to play a make your move main deck. I don't think that's that embarrassing. Pick your poison. I actually think 1 copy is quite main deckable in green deck. So like, you just being able to interact, period, is very important. Those are the 2 things that really jumped out to me leading up to the PT.
Yeah, I think so. And I mentioned that a lot of those Thursday morning drafts on MTGO, I've been black a lot more because of 2 drops and removal. Like if you're like, you start down red and your red's getting cut, you're seeing some black cards. Like black has the 2/1 that you can suspect and then like turns into a late game threat. I think I'm higher on that card than you are.
Yeah.
Because it's a 2 drop, and then you've got 3 removal spells. You've got Murder, you've got Extracted Confession, you've got Slice from the Shadows in black, and you're gonna see some amount of those. It's a very nice, oh, my draft isn't going so hot, I feel like I'm getting cut, let me jump into black. It's a very nice safety valve.
I agree. So anything is viable, but how are you making it viable, I think is important. Let's talk about I feel like we all know about like what white wants to do. I think it's a little less clear, like, okay, if I'm starting down red, what's happening? So let's talk about white first.
Yeah, I think if you start white, you have to be ready to fight. Like,
yeah.
You should not pick white cards if you don't want to be white. Like you've got to want it, because in those pod drafts, everybody knows what's up. Everybody knows white is good. I mean, you saw LSV 3-0 with red white, bread and butter on day 1 draft 1 of the PT.
And day 2.
And day 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, so white is great, but everybody knows that. So there's a little bit of, am I going to stick to my guns here? And you also can get juked out by the play boosters, right? There just might be a booster that gets past you that no white cards were opened. Or, as you alluded to, the Coalition of the Pack, sometimes there's only 1 or 2 white drafters because the white cards just weren't there, despite a really deep roster of commons. So I think if you're starting your draft with Novice Inspector, your intention should not be, oh, I'm going to be flexible and move off this Novice Inspector.
You got to give weight to that Novice Inspector.
Yes, if you want to be white and you start with Novice Inspector, you've got to want to go deeper into white.
And it doesn't take many picks. Like, I think if you're like white card, white card, white card, you're just kind of in. And even if it starts to dry up, you just got to trust, like, all right, let's figure out what the other color that's open is, and then it's going to come in pack 2 because I've passed literally none of it in pack 1.
Well, and sometimes it's cut in pack 2 because your neighbor knows, okay, I didn't see white, I'm going to get it from the right, and they undercut you from pack 2. But
that's why Novice Inspector is tough, because like you do have to be heavy white, but also it's fine on like turn 3. Just like play it, crack a clue. So maybe not. Maybe you can be like 10-7, 10 mountains, 7 plains, and
you feel fine about Novice Inspector.
Okay, I feel fine.
I feel fine about Novice Inspector. But I think white in particular gives you the benefit of, normally we wouldn't want to force like that, right?
No.
But it's so good, so deep that you're going to get some amount, no matter how cut it is. And then as long as you find the right secondary color to pair with it, you still end up with a good white X deck.
When we talk about blue, I feel like blue is mostly a good support color, because I'm happy to pair it with, I think, all of them. I'm happy to be, blue-black probably the least, but I'm still happy with blue-black. And we should, maybe this is the time to shout out. So Simon Nielsen sent coverage yesterday, like intel from Team Handshake about their approach to draft, which is unsurprisingly a real zag. They really didn't like white that much. They liked to avoid it because they felt like it was overdrafted, and their opinion was shallow. Like, they weren't super high on Inside Source. They're not super high on Projector Inspector either, which are 2 cards in our top 10, largely because I think they feel that yeah, maybe they're good or whatever, but they still trade with a disguised creature, and you're gonna have no shortage of things to do on turn 3. So like, why prioritize those when you don't need to give the same weight that other people are to them, and then you can just draft the other stuff. And they actually really liked blue-black. Like a lot of the like last pick value cards, like Deduce or Fairy Snoop, they seem to be like, we're in for that, because you can then like get a lot of fixing, play all the bombs people can't play when they pass them in pack 2 or pack 3. And I feel like I certainly like that mindset. I don't know if that works specifically for me. I feel like I can get behind about 80% of that sentiment. But like, that just goes to show you, like, those are incredibly good players, and they're really like, oh, that's the worst archetype? No, we're fine with that.
Well, and to me, that's more, rather than, it sounds like maybe they were trying to lean into that a little bit. Like, for me, that would just be a tool in your tool belt.
Correct.
That you're able to draft. And I don't know that I would be going into the draft steering towards it, but back to your point about blue being versatile, like, it really is. You're fine with all 4. I think, for me, blue-black the least, but
Yeah.
blue-white is great. Blue-red Streamline is great. Shout out to blue-green. It's back.
It's back. Back and better than ever. I agree. So then, black. Said you drafted, ended up in black a lot in the pod drafts. Like, where do you go? Because I think black has a huge split. Like, you really can't, you can do the black-white, black-red, Snarling Gorehound, low to the ground aggro thing, and you can also do black-green, black-blue, late game, removal, value thing. Like, and there's a kind of a pretty big divide there. It's often the sort of identity crisis I think we feel white sometimes has is present with black.
Well, I think it depends on when and how you get into it. I think if you're starting black, you're trying to steer into blue-black or black-green and more of those late-game decks. I think because a lot of the better black cards, quote-unquote, go in those type of decks, whereas if you're getting into black as your secondary color, I feel like that's more often when you end up in white-black or red-black, because you started white got cut, you hopped into black because you know you're going to get playables there. You started red got cut, you're hopping into black because you know you're going to get playables there.
Yeah, no, I buy that for sure. I threw this out when we were chatting last night about Extract a Confession being what I think is black's top common in terms of like, if I see something, pick 5, and I'm like, okay, that's my first black card I'm going to take. That feels like Extract to me. Like, I love Snarling Gorehound with a vengeance, but I don't think that's the spot to take that card.
Yeah. And
what else? Slice, Murder, like...
Yeah, all of those cards.
Agent.
But ultimately, it just doesn't matter because they're all so interchangeable.
They are really interchangeable.
That was the conclusion I came to last
night.
Yeah.
All right, what's going on with red?
With red, if you start red, I think you're hoping, obviously, to be red-white.
White.
And then secondarily, I think red-blue artifacts, a very streamlined deck. The thing that felt weird to me about that, like when I saw your team's list, there were a lot of red-blue cards way up there. And I love red-blue when it comes together. It just feels dangerous to me to draft because it's so high synergy that like, it's really easy to end up with 2/3 of a good red-blue deck and hoping to not draw that other third of your deck. But if you get there all the way, certainly love red-blue. It's just a dangerous one, I think, as far as risk-taking levels go in the format. Maybe an unnecessarily risk, in my opinion, but if you get there for sure. So red-white, then red-blue. And I personally, I'm still trying to avoid red-green. I don't feel like I really understand it yet. A lot of tricks going on there. But then red-black have come way up on, I think, when you start red, get cut, add black as your secondary color.
Yeah, I buy that. And then green, I think, like, green's commons have a lot to offer. I feel like there's kind of a little bit of a divide. Not that these cards can't all go in the same deck, but, like, I think about some kinds of green decks being, like, Tunnel Tipster on 2, Eavesdropper on 3, beating down, like maybe pairing it with white, getting the oh gosh, I'm forgetting. This is my third. No, I don't know any card names. But the green-white hybrid that flips up and gets counters.
You're a real PT competitor.
I'm a real PT competitor. Yeah, it's all out. It's all out now. But so like a beat down, get ahead of the curve green deck versus like ramping, splashing value, and that's where I think about Nervous Gardener. I think about V2 Ghazi Inspector holding the ground early, gaining me a little life later. But you can put all those cards together, and I think green feels like a star in this set. It doesn't, like oftentimes green is a support color. I don't think that. Like my green decks are heavy green in this format a lot of the time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think Loxodon Eavesdropper certainly stands out to me. Like all of the cards, I was a little cooler on that card prior to this week, and also Cold Case Cracker, the 3 and a blue, 3/3 flyer.
Yep.
Like I've slandered that a little bit, but all of those cards in pod draft that are just 2-for-1s, like go up. It's just hard to get really good card quality through your deck the way you would an arena best of one draft or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
like I'm not thrilled to play Cold Case Cracker in my arena best of one draft. Like if I'm in blue and I'm playing Cold Case Cracker, after drafting with 7 other drafters that feel very competent, I feel great putting a Cold Case Cracker in my 4-drop slot.
That's something that I was thankful for doing so many pod drafts leading up to this week, was that, like, if you only do, I would say certainly arena best of one draft, you get a sort of like false sense of what an average deck looks like. Because in pod drafts, certainly you can have ones, and this is what was so helpful about doing the drafts on Thursday in the lobby, of like getting to talk to people afterwards about where they ended up, whatever, is like,
and how they felt
you
during
get
the
a
draft.
sense of like, oh, everybody's scrapping right now, or everybody has a good deck.
And just getting to see everyone's decks, like where they were sitting in relation to you, was a big level up for sure.
Yeah, a lot more like, I think people ending up in fine decks and being in each other's business, like black, green, black, green, black, green, all next to each other, and like people getting good-looking decks. It can happen, it's not crazy. But I think understanding that, because you can have a like, oh man, my draft didn't go well. It's like, well, but pod draft's different because it's a zero-sum game of the power level, right? If you open all the good stuff or whatever, if you don't see good stuff, that probably means other people are not seeing great stuff either.
Well, and that's one of the things about white, like where you're trying to figure out, do I, don't I? Like you can really get yourself in trouble in pod if you're trying to be white-red and you're like subpar white-red for a pod draft. Like the green decks just laugh at a mediocre red-white aggro deck, right? Like if you don't really truly get there on the number of 2-drops you need, the interaction, the tricks, and all that stuff, it is a little more dangerous in pod draft.
And what do you want to say about this last bullet point here about the pick ripple effect?
Pick ripple effect, I don't know. We talked about it last week. I just think staying open is so important. Like I can't hammer it home enough. Like, but in the way of trying to get deep into one color, because normally I'm all for white card, blue card, black, red, gold card, green card, 4 picks in, you got 5 different colors in your pile. Like, to me, that's staying open too. But this format is synergistic enough and powerful enough that I don't think you need to try to stay open that way. And oftentimes it can lead you to tough decisions where you're still ultimately having to choose a lane of, okay, I'm going to be white aggro, or okay, I'm going to be green soup. And you don't get that much benefit from trying to stay open in that fashion in this format.
Yeah. Well, should we get to the draft?
Let's do it. The PT Draft Roundtable.
Okay. So I remembered quite a bit of this draft. We have enough to chat about. And I haven't told you this yet, but so you get the packs are already sort of like opened and bound for you. And so for my first pack, pack A, the top card had a blemish on the bottom.
So you got a new pack?
I called the judge and I got a new pack. And my new pack's rare. It was kind of stinky. And so I was like, well, what if I hadn't called the judge and just gone with it? But whatever. So this is what we'll sit down and check out here for pack 1, pick 1. What do we got?
Pack 1, pick 1, Pro Tour Karlov at MagicCon Chicago. You see the following cards as options. Your rare, Officious Interrogation, which is blue-white, investigate X, where X is the total number of creatures target player controls, and you can cast it for blue-white X for each player you want to target. So you can actually target both players. Learned that when I was reading the card today in preparation for the show.
Unplayable.
Very on brand. Unplayable, yes. So really, you're choosing between 2 cards, Insidious Roots, black-green enchantment. I think you and I are pretty high on this deck, the chalk outline deck. So Insidious Roots is an enchantment. Whenever a creature leaves your graveyard, you're going to make an 0/1 plant token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control, and then your tokens tap for any color of mana. Certainly a backdoor deck that's very strong. I think maybe not steering into it at the PT, but if you get into green or black and this is there, I mean, that was certainly in your repertoire. And alongside this, you saw a Revel Belt Maverick in the pack too, isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
A green 1/1 ETB Surveil 2, and then you can exile from your graveyard for a green to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So some tempting fruit there with the Insidious Roots. And then there's also Forensic Researcher, which is 2 and a blue for the 1/3. You can tap it to untap target permanent, and you can tap it to collect evidence 3 and tap target creature.
Yeah, so rare is stinky, Insidious Roots is fun, and was certainly like on my radar of like, it could wheel, like I could be at a table. I didn't recognize anyone at my table as like a crusher. I wasn't sitting with Luis or Reed or whatever. Like no one that I really recognized, though I actually do think one person did top 8. So
I was going to say, wow, feels bad if you're at Ethan's table.
Maybe an actual
Apologies.
crusher. But it's a high risk, high reward thing. I don't know. People could just not be high on it. It's very possible that it could wheel. But forensic researcher, that was the pick that was going to make Ben proud. So I couldn't take roots.
Heard my voice in your head. I appreciate it.
So I took the researcher. So that felt like a kind of a lackluster. I mean, we're taking not a top common, we're taking not a top uncommon. It's not great.
I mean, I like researcher. I initially had it on our top uncommons list, and you put your foot down and wouldn't let me put it on there.
So we take the blue 3 drop. What's going on next?
But you're happier, for example, with novice inspector than forensic
I'm
researcher.
happier with
pack
novice
one, pick
inspector
one.
for sure.
Didn't get there, unfortunately. So pack 1, pick 2. With a forensic researcher in your file, you see the following cards as options. There's a reckless detective, which is the 1 in red for the O3, and whenever it attacks, you have the choice of sacrificing an artifact or discarding a card to draw a card. If you do, it gets +2/+0. That card's been very strong. As well as exit specialist, which is 1 in a blue for the 2/1. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater, and has disguise for 1 in a blue. And when you flip it up, you can bounce a creature back to its owner's hand.
Yeah, and so this is, I think, sort of the pick order in action, but already the ripple effect in action, which is that if this were pack on pick 1, we would take Reckless Detective. It was on our top 10 uncommons list. But the gap here is not so big that I'm going to take the card that I think is just better in a vacuum. I'm going to get deeper into one color and take Exit Specialist. And also, I already knew, right, going back to the things that I knew about these drafts, was pinch on removal, pinch on 2 drops. Exit Specialist kind of solves both of those problems.
Yeah, it's interaction, and in case of emergency, you can crack the glass and play it on turn 2. You're certainly hoping to not do that, though.
Yeah, so pretty happy with that going into pick 2. Obviously not happy to pass Reckless Detective, but what can you do?
Well, and I think in other formats, too, you might take a Reckless Detective-esque card. This format just is a little bit different, I think, in that regard.
I agree. Pack 1, pick 3. Stinky. There is not much to talk about. I remember the 2 cards I was choosing between. I do not remember what else was in the pack. So there was an Out Cold, the 3 in a blue, tap 2 things, put a stun counter on them, investigate. And honestly, I really almost thought about taking Jaded Analyst third, the 1 in a blue 3/2 defender. If you've drawn a second card, it can it loses defender and it can attack with vigilance that turn. I took the Out Cold, which I was happy about because I didn't really have a spot to take another one later and really wanted to end up with one. And also happy when we get to the wheel. We'll see a Jaded Analyst come around. But like, that's how much I think there's a pinch on playing stuff early. Again, a zero-sum thing of like, there's only so many 2-drops that are floating around.
Well, and it sounds like you had some weak packs too, right? Like if there's any white card, if there's an inside source, if there's a makeshift binding, if there's not even Dogwalker, maybe a Granite Witness or something, like you're snapping that up here in lieu of Out Cold. So it seems like you saw some weak packs your first 3 packs.
Weak packs for sure. So we took the Out Cold, and then the rest of the pre-wheel, I got a Dogwalker 4th. So I was like, okay, that seems like signal-ish. And I felt good about the flexibility of it. Happy to be blue-red, happy to be blue-white. Cold Case Cracker, again, feeling like the packs were weak, and I was also like, oh, I took the Out Cold, now I have a Cold Case Cracker. I'm already got 2 like fine 4-drops. But like, it doesn't feel great.
It doesn't feel great, but I mean, you're setting yourself up with this to be deep blue. You're going to have a lot of options in pack 2, and Cold Case Cracker's a problem. I mean, somebody's going to have to deal with it at some point. They're either going to die to a 3/3 flyer, or you're going to get a clue. You're kind of happy in both. I said you were unhappy in both those scenarios. I was thinking best of 1 on Arena, but in Pod Draft, you're okay with that.
I think so. And then a Crime Stopper Sprite, I remember that as well. I was basically mono blue coming out of pack 1, and then the wheel, I got a Jaded Analyst from my opening pack, and then got that Jaded Analyst that I almost thought about taking third. And so I was feeling great. I had like all blue cards and Dogwalker, and so do the Ben Werney special. Get deep into one color, figure out the rest later. And the rest presented itself pretty quickly. Got a pack 2, pick 1, Ezram. And it was the alt art one, so I was like going through, I was like, oh, okay. And then that felt like decision time. You know, we often talk about that the decision happens pack 2, pick 1, 2, 3, 4 of like, you have to figure out where your point of no return is in a draft. And that was it. Ezram is one of the most busted rares in the set, I think. And I was like, I don't need, I'm aware that other people are drafting white. I'm not going to be heavy white, I assume. But I can snap up enough to be able to be blue-white, was my plan.
Yes, I would certainly agree with locking in blue-white.
Yeah.
After an Ezram here, pack 2, pick 1.
Thank you for that, that backup there. So the rest of pack 2, we got a Seasoned Consultant. Ended up with the 2 Jaded Analysts, the Exit Specialist. My only other 2-drop going into pack 3 was the Seasoned Consultant that I got like pick 7, I think, or something. So that was on my list going into pack 3 was, okay, I need 2-drops, and I basically had no removal. My creature count was really good. Got an inside source here. Projector Inspector ended up with, I forget if I had 2 or 1 in Pack 2, but I ended up with 3 in the final build that we'll get to. But so those were my 2 notes. Like, I hadn't seen a makeshift binding, so I needed interaction. And I felt like because of how I was trying to set up my deck as blue-white tempo, I needed more 2s. And so, Pack 3, pick 1. I see 2 rares, if they'll go. Yeah, I see 2 rares and a derpy little white 2-drop. So open on Incinerator of the Guilty. This is the mythic 4-red, 6/6 flying trample dragon. If it deals damage to a player, you can collect evidence X and then deal X damage to all their creatures. Like, stone cold bomb. And I think if I had all my picks in front of me and was drafting on Arena or Magic Online, there might have been a spot where I then go, all right, let's drag all the white cards to a column. What am I giving up? How many picks am I going to have to mess with? But I just felt like I didn't have that mental space, certainly, and not sure if I had that time.
Well, and also you've got an Ezra,
I've got an
which
Ezra.
is an Incinerator-esque card.
Yeah.
And there's a Market Watch Phantom. You've said you needed 2-drops. I checked in with you on this pick. We haven't seen each other, talked that much. This convention has been insane.
Yeah.
I was like, you took Market Watch Phantom here, right? And you said you did.
I did. Yeah, I took Market Watch Phantom, the 1 and a white 2/2. If another creature with power 2 or less comes into play under your control, it gains flying until end of turn. Also, notably in this double rare pack, there was a Lost in the Maze, which I do think just in a vacuum is probably worse than Out Cold. And I was like, well, I already have Out Cold. I don't really yes, I need interaction, but is this really the interaction that I need? Lost in the Maze isn't going to be as good if I don't have the 2-drops to back it up. So I ate some vegetables here, and I took Market Watch Phantom. It didn't feel great at the time. And then moving on to Pack 3, Pick 2, notably there was a Detective Satchel in that last Pack too, and then a Detective Satchel here, furthermore being like, what if I could have the dragon and then going with this and go blue-red instead, but then I got to the Novice Inspector towards the back of the pack. I was like, okay, I'm going to take that. We're good. Again, really didn't end up as we get to the full deck here. I don't know how much people can see it, but don't have a ton of interaction. I'm playing a Dramatic Accusation, the 2 and a blue, tap a thing, keep it tapped.
But that's not unusual for pod draft.
Right.
I think totally fine with that.
So a 16 creature deck. Playing Unauthorized Exit, the bounce spell, just get some ways to mess with stuff in combat or whatever. 16 creatures, ended up running 18 lands, 11 islands, 7 plains, because I had 3 Projector Inspectors. That was my last real okay, do I want to play one more thing and run 17? But I really just err on the side of, if you can hit land drops, you're going to be okay. And with 3 Projector Inspectors, I just felt like I want to get to 3 lands on time every time.
Well, and the other thing that was super nice about your deck, well, it was cool watching you, just hearing the call draft at the PT. That was an awesome scene at the start of the con. But you flashed us your Ezram after you were
during
done.
Deck building.
During deck building.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, after you came out and showed us your deck that I hadn't quite put together yet, the Jaded Analysts are great aggro cards in your deck because of the 3 Projector Inspectors, right? Mana-free way to draw cards if you're curving out with the Detective Synergy. This deck could beat down and put the hurt on.
Yeah, for sure.
And then as a result, all of those tempo cards that you have act a little bit more like removal and help solve that pinch.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was pretty happy. I felt like that was the deck for my seat. Maybe I could have pivoted for red. That just doesn't feel responsible to me, really. I think I did the right thing. And as you can see, not many white cards. Mostly mono blue, handful of white cards. There's the Ezra and the Dog Walker. And that's the deck. So we'll talk about the rounds real quick.
Yeah, please.
So match 1, it was a great game. I was going along, got my stuff, really planning out. It's a blue-white mirror, actually. They were blue-white splashing red. And got to play, I was like, okay, I'm going to play Ezram with 2 mana up, so it resolves, play around Reasonable Doubt, make sure I have the 2 mana up to be able to sack the clues, to do any messiness, whatever. They can't mess with this.
That's how I would feel also.
And then they cast No Witnesses, which is a card that I just didn't know we played in white decks in this format. So that, I was like, and then I just looked at my gray, all my Projector Inspectors were gone, and I can't win this game. Crack a bunch of clues, land. All right, great. Go to game 2, win that game, and then we're in a tight game 3, and just my opponent ended up being able to get the win with a Griffnaught tracker, just pecking in the air over and over again. I had a really interesting spot, like I was like having to think about all of my outs because I had a Jaded Analyst, but no way to get it to attack. And so I kept thinking like, okay, if I draw like on the job, I'll have a clue. If I draw Auspicious Arrival, I'll have a clue. And so just trying to construct what my outs were, but then just a land, which happens when you run 18 lands.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, started off the day with a loss.
Speaking of on the job, that card has skyrocketed for me over the past 4 days. I mean, hyperbole here, but it's very close to overrun draw a card. It puts your opponent in horrible spots.
I agree. I mean, like, just the fact that you can fail case, 2-drop, 3-drop, attack, they don't block, and you go, sure, deal you 4 extra, draw a card.
And then you draw a card, but also by doing that chunk of damage, you crunch how they can play the rest of that game.
Yeah.
Because they're worried about future on the jobs, or I mean, it's so hard to be the aggressor after you've taken 12 from an on the job or whatever.
Yeah, and you have to like always think about it too. Like your blocks always have to anticipate +2 power, +1 toughness on all of your opponent's creatures.
But then they also don't have to fire it off. Like,
right, so you block poorly, and they're like,
very hard to play around.
Yeah, for sure. Match 2 played against the blue-green deck. It was weird, so you don't play big X, little x. I was assuming, at least for the first match, you would play the person across the table from you. Not. My first round opponent was 2 to my right. My second round opponent was directly to my left. They were on blue-green, kind of mediums, I would say. And I won game 1 and actually got to kind of like steal-ish. I think a game that they would have won online because their Rubble Belt Maverick would have been nice and floating on the right side out of their graveyard, like, hey, exile me, put a counter on something. But it wasn't. It was just hiding in their graveyard. I almost conceded, and I was like, all right, I'll just play the turn. I tapped out, cast Ezram. But if they had exiled Rubble Belt Maverick, they would have been able to present lethal with their attackers. As it was, they only could put me to 1. They started off the turn, cracked a clue. I was like, oh no, I don't think they see it. Then they cast a Vitu-Ghazi Inspector and passed. And I was like, okay. And then Ezram did some Ezram things and gained me 5-10 life, and we were back in it. So felt good. Once I got the like match win monkey off my back, I felt fine. I was like pretty bummed after match 1. I got the win in match 2. Felt pretty good.
Yeah, and your round 2 opponent was super nice. After the draft, came up and found me. It was like, hey, huge fan of the show. Like, after the rounds were done, like, sent me his deck list for the podcast. Like, just very cool guy.
Yeah, awesome.
Shout out to Kane.
And then match 3 was a bit of deja vu, as you'll see on the slide. The same thing happened. I was like, all right, we got Ezram. We got mana up. We're good. No witnesses. I was like, how is this happening? My opponent's deck was very good. They were on red-white, double Dogwalker, double Galvanized, case of the Burning Masks. No witnesses, which was good. And then the awful thing about seeing no witnesses game 1 is then you have to, it like cripples the way you play the rest of the match.
Well, certainly with an Ezram. Like that card is uniquely hard for your deck to deal with. Like, it's still not that busted of a rare in the context of the overall format.
Right.
It's a good card that you're going to play when you're not like super all in aggro. But with an Ezram, like, you just don't know when to run it out then.
I know, yeah. So I lost game 1, managed to get the wins in game 2, game 3. My opponent mulliganed to 6, all 3 games. Their deck looked excellent. And then because I knew where they were sitting, 2 to my left, at the end I was like, that's where you were? He was like, yeah. I was like, so you have a very shy dragon in your deck? And he pulled it out. So I was very lucky to have not seen that. But I do think like that's a great example because I did think about it when I saw it. I was like, this card's so nuts. Should I hate this?
No.
But like, yeah, this is credence to that thought of like, look, I even faced the person I passed it to who put it in their deck, and they never drew it. So like, that can happen.
And your Market Watch Phantom was great, I assume.
And my Market Watch Phantom was great. It was really, really great for sure. So that was the limited portion. So I felt good. 2-1 the draft.
I was on plan.
That was on plan.
2-1 the draft, 2-3 Pioneer.
The rest did not go to plan. The Pioneer wheels, if they were ever on, fell off pretty quickly. I did like, some of it was like losing the matchup lottery. Some of it was, I don't think I picked a good deck.
And your deck was?
Red-black mid-range, specifically tuned for the Mirror and Blue-Red Phoenix. Like, we had some cool, like, but just main decking Aclazats, 4 copies of Graveyard Trespasser, etc. And those two decks plus blue-white made up 40% of the field. I faced one of those decks in my 5 rounds that I played. So like a little bit of losing the matchup lottery, 2 like mistakes that I made that I think I could have known to not make that I will not bore you with. But the rest, like I just think lessons learned for me, like some of it is like Magic do be like that, and some of it for me is like I still am just so like amazed at the delta between how you're wrapping your brain around playing limited well and wrapping your brain around playing constructed well. Like my brain is not built for it yet.
It's tough. Well, we were talking about like the closest we've come to blows on the podcast. You were telling me which deck you picked, and I was like, I don't know. And you were like, you cannot do that to me right now. You know nothing. You cannot question my deck.
Well, and I can say this now. There was sort of like this 11th hour deck that Team Sanctum came up with that about half of them, maybe 4 of them played in the PT. Jason Yee, who like just almost top 8'd their first Pro Tour, lost like 3 win-in-ins, which is so heartbreaking. But like they came up with this pretty incredible like fused blue-white control, added Lightning Helix and Fable, and like jammed creativity for Atraxa. So sort of fused like 3 different decks together. That was really good. But like a day before deck registration, they were like fiddling with the mana base. I was like, I can't. This is far too stressful for me. I don't know how you do it. But I think one of my takeaways is like, I think I actually need to trust that if I get to this position next time, I'll be playing in Arena Champs at the end of the month. That like, if something like that happens, I think I need to trust myself a little bit more. If I recognize the power level of this deck and just be like, hey, I can do it. I could probably maybe get up to some amount of speed on this thing. And the other thing is I think like the deck, like Rakdos midrange is a very reactive deck. Like when you Thoughtseize, you have to know like everything about their deck and their hand and what the right thing to take is. And like, that's something that I'd put in a lot of reps, but it's still, there's so much room for error there. I do think next time I would be better off being like, I'm going to do a deck that does its thing, and you got to disrupt me. Not Lotus Field. That's what I said.
We were talking, if I'm ever lucky enough to queue for the PT, I want the least interactive constructed deck possible so I can do my thing, just let the luck fall where it may.
Yeah. And again, I just get a huge shout out to Team Sanctum for having me. Like, it was awesome to get to Jake Beardsley and Matt Foreman on the same deck. It was really cool to talk to them. It was awesome to see like Kane and Jason figuring out the creativity deck. It was awesome to get my butt kicked practicing against Autumn playing Phoenix a bunch. Like, shout out to her. She like basically taught, like, I like 1-7'd with that deck when I was like doing my gauntlet of playing a bunch. I was like, I don't get this. And then played it against her a bunch, and then I was like 4-1 to league with it. I was like, oh, I think because I've seen her like play so well with it, I can figure this out. So that was very cool. Felt like a nice like being a bit of a fly on the wall. And then got to feel like, when we got to the limited meeting, get to be like, no, I actually, my opinion, I could say something about this, you know? So that was really, really cool. Those are that's it. And now we're doing this? We're on this stage? Like, what's happening? It's crazy.
Absolutely wild. I think the thing that sticks out for me the most, not having been a part of the PT, like, just the sheer amount of stuff happening at this convention.
The biggest Magic Con ever.
Biggest Magic Con ever is absolutely outrageous. We literally didn't talk that much until last night.
No.
Like, all I've done since I got here on Wednesday was eat and draft like prior to last night. It's just absolutely
Shout
wild.
out to the fried chicken sandwich at the bar in the hotel. Ben was incredible. So effusive about the sandwich.
Very good. My palate is very bland, and they don't make food like that in Southern Indiana.
Unreal. Well, this has been incredible. An incredible weekend. Amazing cap to it doing this live show. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to the folks at MagicCon Chicago for having us. This sold out MagicCon is awesome. Stick around at 2 o'clock. There's going to be a PT Top 8 watch party with Brian David Marshall, and I think some other pros are going to be there too. Thank you all for coming out to watch and taking time out of the con weekend to be with us. We really appreciate it. And until next time, until the next live podcast episode, thank you for watching.
See you all later.